Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another 21st Century Renaissance and another open interest newsletter breakdown on GameStop. I'm your host, Dr. Michael LoPiano, and today we're going to be thinking about what is to be expected from this otherwise highly irregular week, especially this week where we will see, those of you, this may be your first time, right, seeing a special dividend go ahead and bring about this split of the options chain. So we're going to be thinking about what exactly that's going to look like. We're already seeing some of the effects of that already from Friday. So we'll be thinking about that today when we get into our financials. Before we start, of course, we are going to turn our attention to our literary philosophical approach ventures, and that is to continue along with our reading of the biblical canon with our reading in the book of Genesis. Before we do, though, I wanted to point out a little, a bit, right? One of the reasons that I do this, I mean, there are many reasons I do this, but one of them in particular is that, I deeply consider the structures of perspective and thought that are contained within the biblical corpus, some other areas as well, but especially the biblical corpus, as being absolutely essential and foundational for me, fundamental for me in developing my understanding as to become successful as a trader and investor. I can claim that personal experience, and I have a sense, right, that also trained as a historian, that this is a major advantage to base a civilization, to base a culture, to base a long-term society upon the principles contained herein. Certainly, I would recommend if I can say I've had a lot of personal success by my own measurements by studying this corpus. And one of the things, I guess, an example I can draw out today, and I think it feeds in well to our reading from the book of Genesis today, is this bit from another one of my little personal projects, also associated with 21st Century Renaissance, called Learn Greek, in which we're going through some of the key vocabulary of the Western canon, taking a look both at the Hellenistic philosophical tradition, the works of philosophers, poets, Stoics, Plato, Aristotle, things like this, as well as taking a look at the direct language of the Gospels. So today, and this week, right, we had a reading from the Gospel according to Luke, for those of you following in the Catholic lectionary. And it has to do with this notion of being a useless or unprofitable servant. It's this term in Greek, achreos, which quite literally means, right, without need, without function, without purpose, without utility, something like that, to be without some sort of advantage which is provided on the part of the doer, from chresis, which is use. We might translate that, quite frankly, as use. And one of the things that continues to amaze me as I spend time taking a look at the Gospels, especially in the original Greek, is the degree to which Christ in particular uses images, uses metaphors that have to do with seeing the principles of value, right? So things like return on investment, concepts like interest, compound interest, investment, right? These are contained, right? Understanding the behavior of value, often with money as a proxy, but secondarily, right, also within this concept of service, right? And in the investment of time, attention, resources into the master and servant relationship. And in this particular case, in speaking about uselessness, right, the disciples are asking Christ to give them more faith, right? That what Christ says, that the principles that he provides them will give them this opportunity to do great things, to work wonders in the name of God. And they say to him, but give us some measurement by which to increase our faith. Give us some evidence by which we can believe more. Give us some evidence by which we can trust you more. And Christ's response is to say, no. Trust is the minimum. You have to start from there. You have to start from belief. It's not, right? The idea is that in order to do great things in the name of God, you must begin with some manner of trust in God, some manner of trust in what Christ teaches. You must act as though you already believe it to be true. Even if your trust is weak, you have to start here. This is the bare minimum. If you want to get started, if you want to get working on those wonders, it's one of the things that's required. It's not the only one. And he uses a metaphor, right? He uses this image of being useless servants, douloi achreioi. And the idea that those who are always seeking to have more evidence, seeking for that, right, rather than serving outright, are seeking some sort of affirmation, some sort of praise or magnification based on doing the bare minimum of what is required. And the idea here, right, is that no, if you wish to do great things, if you wish to see, let's say, divine creative power work through you in the world, there is more to it than simply having that modicum of faith. Faith is not something which is, trust is not something which is given prior, but on the part of the master, but given on the part of the servant. And so there is an idea that what is expected is that there will be some greater amplification that will come by means thereafter of that investment in trust, of that risk taken on the part of the one who would trust in God. And this is where the idea, right, of faith being, even if it is the size of a mustard seed, that wonders with it can be worked in time through the divine power of God. That's certainly Christ's claim here in the Gospels. And this acts quite curiously. I'm sure maybe some would not make a connection here between this and hearing about the descendants of Cain, our continuation from the reading of the book of Genesis. But there is an important parallel here, and it is that parallel. It is a parallel in terms of the concept of compound interest, of investment, right? Of seeing the effects, right? Consequence compound over time. To have not merely a vision of you give me this, I give you that, right? Merely that kind of zero sum, I'll do this, but only if you do this first. Well, I'll do this if only you do this first. But to have a vision that seeks deeper in time. And this is built in right in the beginning here with the continual structures of long-term consequence. We see this here in the description of the descendants of Cain. Let's take a look at the passage, and we can think about how this image is embedded within what seems to be otherwise an unassuming series of names and genealogies. And Cain knew his wife, that is, laid with her, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. That is, it is Cain who built the city. And unto Enoch he was born Irad. And Irad begat Mahuyael. And Mehuyael begat Methusael. And Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. And Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. And he was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, that is bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God said, she hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and his name Enos. And began men to call upon the name of the Lord. And so what we see here, right, is this is the first account of extended descent. The Bible is a corpus that from its very onset, we've talked about this concept, asks you as the reader, as the individual that experiences this story, to consider descent, to consider not merely if A then B, but if A then B and C and D and E and F and G, right? It asks you, it forces you, in essence, to understand the story. Otherwise, this seems strange and a bizarre listing of names. What's all this for? I mean, certainly this type of stuff was not clear to me when I was, say, 10 or 12 and reading through the Bible. And like, what is with all these lists of names? But to the tellers of these stories, to those who include these lineages, the grasping of consequence through time, of descent, of how a decision made in the past can have consequence and far-reaching consequence over an extended period of time. And we see some of this, right? So Cain, despite this murder of his wife, despite committing, or murder of his wife, murder of his brother, and committing to this way of life, interestingly, right, the first thing that he goes and does is build a city. The first thing he does is build a city. That's very interesting. It suggests, right, the Bible suggests that the building of cities is a consequence of Cain's commitment to this way of life. Cain's way of approaching life, Cain's way of approaching the world, organizing the world, bringing it into being, is that same impetus which brought about the creation of the first city, or at least a city. We also have, in the line of Cain, we have our first instance of polygyny, right? The taking of multiple wives, a form of polygamy. This is not something which is original to the human condition. This is not something practiced by the first parents. This is not something even physically possible in the case of the first human beings which are brought into existence. But nonetheless, this is what we find in the lineage that is descended from Cain. Now, one, of course, begs the question, where are these multiple women that he is able to take to wife? It seems to suggest that there are maybe something else going on in the background here. Maybe some other, who knows? Does it suggest that there are other breedable but less human people out there in the world? Is it that there is enough of a descent from Adam and Eve, for example, through the line of Cain, that the descendants of Cain marry into their own line, taking multiple blood relatives from this descent? That's a bit more plausible, perhaps, than the insertion of half-human creatures of some sort. But in any case, right, the descent from Cain has such consequences as to introduce certain practices which are alien to the original circumstances of human creation. The taking of multiple wives is an important one that emerges from this. The building of cities is a second one. The development, let's say, on the one hand, of nomadism. So having a nomadic way of life that is dwelling in tents, right? Those who do not settle down, but who never set down in a home and possess cattle. So that is the keeping of herds of cattle. This way of life also, interestingly, descends from Cain. And also the production of musical instruments and the working in the materials which will be used for weapons of war. So technology is also something that comes from the line of Cain. So there is a statement here about what comes in terms of those let's say, institutions which come down to mankind, things which are not natural, which are not a part of the created state of mankind, but something that is a product of the fall, that is a product of Adam and Eve's sin and of Cain's sin. And what we have down the line, among him who is the first to take to himself multiple wives, that is Lamech, we have a man who is, by curse, estimably, 10 times worse than Cain. So he is a man who multiplies his wives. He is a man who multiplies his sense of vengeance. He is a man, right, who has slain a man because such a man wounded him. So he has returned one man's sin with enhanced aggression. One man's aggression, one man's wound, he has returned with death. And a young man, for hurting him, something like that. This is an example of Hebrew parallelism. So the idea here, right, is that he has come up with something like, he practices vendetta, something like this. And it is an amplifying vendetta. So interestingly, he has, right, the descendants of Cain have this vision of augmentation, of auxesis in Greek. And they're capable of seeing this kind of multiplication over time. But interestingly, in the line of Cain, it is a multiplication, an increase, which in part is related to the commands of God, right? Multiply. Be fruitful and multiply is a command that Christ gives to mankind. But here we have the descendants of Cain using that divine ability, something given which is at likeness with the divine, using that ability in order to bring forth multiplications of the original evil. So a perversion of marriage, murder, and the fruits of which are implied by this: if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. So it's 10 times worse. The fruits of Lamech's life as a descendant of Cain, acting according to the way of his ancestor, his great-great-great-grandfather, is that he lives a life that brings upon him a curse 10 times worse than his ancestor. This is the line of Cain. And so what we have first, right, in terms of how to envision consequence, how to envision investment, how to envision growth, multiplication, compound interest, fruitfulness, what we see amid this is that it can lead to an extremely cursed existence if done in the wrong way. And it seems to suggest that there is some sort of combination of all to do with technology, all to do with a certain way of approaching the world. Whatever a city, whatever the nomadic way of life, maybe a certain way of possessing cattle, something like that. Something to do with the production of musical instruments, right? Technology for the production of music, and with weapons of war, the materials that are used for weapons of war. Now, it doesn't directly come out and say that each one of these things unto itself is bad, but the suggestion here is that Cain's actions, the sin of Adam, has these repercussions that lead the descendants who live according to these precedents to a life of cursing, which is 10 times amplified what the original committers of the sin for the first time experienced in their own lives. So Adam has a curse. Cain has a curse. Those who would wound Cain have a curse, which is to be repaid 7 times. And those who would wound or harm Lamech, the descendant of Cain, are those who would be returned a wound or a curse 77 times the magnitude. So I point this out in order to demonstrate, in order to get us thinking in this direction, right? To realize that the principles that go into successful creation, the principles that go into the successful multiplication of value, the principles that go into building a life which is a life of increase, of prosperity, of growth, of creation, of fruitfulness, they are predicated on these very ideas that are contained within this corpus, these extremely old ideas, which have been passed down for countless thousands of years to our descendants, to our to our ancestors, and to us, right? Right, and it is only essentially through us, or through Christ, as sort of a great opener of the particular Jewish tradition that this comes from to the world, that humankind as a whole can have this democratized access, this open access, essentially, right? I mean, that's kind of, in a way, the Christian Revolution is a radical movement in open access to perhaps the most valuable tradition of wisdom, literature, of ideas, of perspective, of understanding value, that basically up to that point and since the world has really ever produced. And if you're watching this video right now, right, you are watching it as a part of something. You are engaging with it in something else that is a consequence of that very tradition, produced by the descendants, produced by what has come as a consequence through many thousands of years of those decisions, of those events, of those miracles that made such a tradition open access in the first place. So something to think about as we begin our week. So I know, right? It's time after 30 minutes of talking about the Bible. Let us now go ahead and take a look at what we've got on the docket today for GameStop. Before we turn our attention to, oops, this is not what I want. Oh, I messed up the date. That's all. I'll fix that in a second. Today is the 6th. I thought I fixed that. It says the 3rd, but today is the 6th. So one more day to dividend. Yes, before we get started, let us turn our attention over to our gratitude. And today's gratitude for today's newsletter and video breakdown go out to Dude McStud. Thank you very much, Dude McStud, as well as to our monthly supporters, Not Medical Advice, Kurt Lusko, Cosmotropic, DeSwag52, Cameron DeLeon, Drew Krantz, and Taya Luckies, aka Faithless Looter. Thank you very much, as always, for your support and as well for your patience, right? I should mention, as well as your patience for some of these camera difficulties I've been having over the past couple days. Had a lot to do with there was an update. I had to get authenticated via Apple and such whatnot. But in any case, I appreciate your patience there. So yeah, two chains are now up on our trading platforms. Certainly I can see it on mine. Here's what it looks like for me. And you can see, right, we've got both the 100 contracts. So this is the new chain, right? Of course, we don't have any IV. We don't have any open interest yet. This is the new chain, all these 100 strikes. This is what is replacing the default chain on GME. While the previous chain, beginning on last Friday, was ported over from being just 100 shares to 100 shares of GME and 10 warrants. So the old chain is still there. This chain where you can see here it says GME/WS10. I don't know what this 10.5.0. I'm not sure what that 0.5.0 is, but GME WS10. This is going to still remain active. You can still trade this, although, as we noticed on Friday, the liquidity in this chain is terrible. And what I imagine that institutions, market makers are going to try to take advantage of these absolutely insane spreads. I think when these opened on Friday, I saw my account dropped in value by 10% or something like that. just because the bids, like the bid ask skews, were so ridiculous. Like every contract was like $0 at the bid and $5 at the ask. And so, if you sold contracts for 30 or 50 or whatever it is, whatever, the strike price was, you were looking at like a 10x change in the value of that strike price. So, if you were, say, on the long side of a trade, then okay, you're pretty happy because maybe you got excited and you look to sell your contracts as quickly as possible because you're like, oh wow, amazing, my account is so green. If you had long contracts. If you had short contracts, maybe you were pulling your hair out because you couldn't understand why you just lost 10% of your account value, something like that. But in any case, right, I noticed that very few people likely had the opportunity to exit anything. Volume was extremely low, despite the fact that I was using a platform where, in fact, I could trade. I did see that there was volume occurring. Trades were happening in the level 2. I could not get a fill at any sort of price that would have been appealing for me. Now, that doesn't mean that prices were not filled at trades were not filled at prices that were appealing to the market maker. I'm sure that this the illiquidity resulted in some form of arbitrage profit for the market maker, making some very hefty returns off some of those spreads with people panicking, trying to get out of their contracts, accidentally punching in, exits at the ask or market orders or something like that, and getting these contracts filled at outrageous prices, especially if they are on the short side. But right, as we can tell, this started off with a bit of a recovery after a bearish close and after hours period. But then this turned into a move deep down to almost $25, which consequently was a little bit below where our max pain was for the week, and down around where we had that multi-week composite lower bound call gamma supported wall there. Now, hedging is going to be a little bit difficult to predict, options hedging. We do have, we will take a look at what dealer positioning was going into the end of last week. But obviously, right, there are a lot more variables at play here. There is a lot less liquidity in the options market, and therefore we are going to see the options market itself be less of a factor in the earlier part of this week. Maybe now that we have some of the monthly OPEXs trading, we will see that play a bigger role today. It does not look like to me it played much of a role at all on Friday, except for maybe some hedging right in the beginning of the day. I'm not sure exactly. Right, we still had those October 3 contracts, which shouldn't have. Well, maybe they did deliver warrants, I suppose, because they were written. That's it. The contract existed prior to. It was a weekly that existed prior to the ex-dividend date, so that meant warrants do have to be delivered for shares that are assigned over the weekend from those contracts. Yikes. It's a bit of a headache. But we also saw this familiar move, which we had been talking about during the week. Certainly pointed this out on Thursday if you had a chance to pop over to my X page, right? Even when I'm having difficulties camera-wise, upload-wise, always have my articles over on my X page, so definitely go take a look there. Try to be active on one or both sites if there's some technical difficulties. But right, we can see this move getting ejected from, right, so I said, okay, Thursday we're going to move basically to the bottom of the channel. We did. And we had this move. The continuation of this move was to be ejected from our channel, which we can see occurred back here, right? The same move occurred basically right before Roaring Kitty's return to X after his hiatus from National Cat Day. This is on December. He returned on December 5th. That was the same day I was banned from Reddit. So interestingly, hopefully we don't. Well, the circumstances are a bit different this time around. I doubt anybody's coming to ban me from X or something like that. And the same circumstances are not on the table. This was, well, it's a tight liquidity situation, but I'm not sure we could expect something of a Roaring Kitty return in this week. But in any case, right, so same type of move, right? We were moving in this upper half of this channel until we touched it a second time after this big overextension here. And then things remained up, up, up. Everybody was getting excited. Oh, we're going, we're staying up here. Now we're going to 35, et cetera, and then shorted down. And then when we moved here, right below the bounds of the of our regression channel, the next stop down was to look for a moving average, the 104-hour moving average in this case, which we already touched. Here we are, right at the 104-hour moving average. And so we'll likely have a bit of maybe a bit of a kickback up today. Nothing crazy, not anything likely in the ballpark of a move back up towards 30, as we'll take a look at in a second in what survives of our options data. But right as we can take a look at our price momentum oscillator, if we take a look at our 4-hour, we are losing support there, right? We see these are uncrossed. We had a bearish cross back here. This was our sort of our second hurrah, and it does say that, yeah, we're likely going to correct down a little bit more here, or at least cool off in terms of where we see most of our price action happening. This does not necessarily mean that our broader multi-month cycle has come to a close. However, and we can take a look at what we're looking at, what we look like over on the daily chart. And that, as we can see, we're starting to move down in terms of this peak. This may turn into something of a fuller bearish sort of downturn in our cycle. But it does look like we're headed for something like these divots, right? We usually have these divots. So something of a pause mid-cycle here. It does look like we'll have something of a divot in this area. I could imagine this will look like something like some sideways action, something more bearish, basically heading into October OPEX, get a bunch of options to expire, worthless, especially off of this optimism. Crank it back up, get another wave of options enthusiasm coming in, especially because we have on October 29th, U.S. National Cat Day. Everybody's avocado in my anus related posts. Roaring Kitty 13G filing date, right? We have an FOMC meeting, and we are highly anticipated to be going through yet another cut. Some of that may already be being priced in, and yeah, usually this results in a bit of bullishness, just like we saw back here in September, right? This post-earnings move. I would expect something of a bit of a sustained rally, maybe for a couple weeks. So some more trading in the upper 20s before then settling back down into something like later November, early December. And then maybe we have a little bit more excitement going into Q3. Maybe something of a smaller pattern cycle, kind of end of the year, early January, come back down. But imagining this as being a sort of a flatter period until maybe late February, we start picking up again, early March, going into the anticipation for the quarter four. The 2025 annual report. So quite a lot to look forward to there. If we look at our options data, is it a little bit trickier to write? I mean, Unusual Whales, for example, just doesn't have new options data for today, given this whole two-chain split. But what we do have is we do have data as it stood on Friday, just prior to everything getting all messed up. So what it looked like at the close on Thursday. What do we see for this week? Well, we see that we still have these really big positions at 28 and 30. But because we've really definitively moved underneath this, the 28 position is going to go ahead and serve as a big resistance intraday with a lot of room to run to the downside here to 24, especially because there's a very large put position down there. However, if we take a look then at next week's expiry, October OPEX, we can see that this comparatively is exerting a lot more influence. I doubt that there was a significant amount of OI from last week's warrant-based chain, maybe rolled into this week. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. I don't have the OI shift data, unfortunately. But we do see that the 25, we have the 25 and the 30 position standing out here. 25 will have a significant influence from October OPEX. Last time I checked, we were looking at something like 25, 27,000 some odd contracts on the call side. So this is still going to offer some support intra week. We did show support there pre-market and toward the end of market close on Friday. So I would anticipate that we still see support there this week as a result of hedging. But maybe going into OPEX, something like some shorting comes up and we get pushed slightly below this for a close somewhere in the 2450, 2470 maybe area, which is down here around, I think, the 200 4-hour moving average, or maybe it's the 200 day. No, it's not 200 4-hour. Maybe it is. Maybe, but it's on this chart. Yeah. Here it is. 204 hour. So around 2470, something like that. Maybe into this area before kind of rallying then on the other side of October OPEX. So that's more or less what I'm looking at today. I would say I am anticipating some challenging liquidity conditions, but I imagine a lot of that is going to be funneled into these new OPEX without warrant expiries that are coming available today. I would not be surprised to see the October OPEX chain without the warrants be very highly liquid today, with a lot of new OI being built there, maybe as given the inability to roll, say, last week's OI into a non-warrant based strike. So maybe we see something like that. In any case, it's going to be, be careful out there. Watch out for weird spread stuff. Don't send in market orders unless you want to get a bunch of your money taken by people who are sharking the spread, by market makers, institutions, I should say, who are sharking the spread. So just be careful out there. Watch out for those illiquid conditions. We should have one more day of sufficient irregularity tomorrow. We still don't have weeklies emerging that don't have the warrants attached to them. So going to be a little bit irregular, lesseningly irregular, but still going to be a little bit irregular coming out of that dividend issuance tomorrow. So yeah, good luck, everybody. Be safe out there, and yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Have a great week, and let's go GameStop. Thanks, everybody.